Good evening, everyone, and welcome to Tadaima Virtual Pilgrimage, the 2022 edition, and my name is Rob Buscher. I'll be hosting this panel this evening. For those of you who've been to previous Tadaimas, you've probably recognized me from some of our other film-centric programs. Tonight, I'm representing the JACL Philadelphia chapter, as well as being a board member of the Philadelphia Asian American Film Festival. So we're very fortunate to be joined this evening by the director, Paul Goodman, as well as three of the leading actors from No No Girl, the film. I hope everyone's had a chance to watch the movie, and we're really looking forward to having an engaging discussion. So for those of you who are following along with us on the live stream, please feel free to drop some comments into the chat, and we'll get to your questions as well as we can within this conversation. So I'd like to start by opening it up to each of our panelists for a brief self-introduction. If you can talk about what brought you into this project, the role that you had in it, and any other anecdotes that you'd like to kind of start the conversation with. So Paul, if you could do the honors as the director.
Hello, I'm Paul Daisuke Goodman, and I started writing this film a little over a year ago. I really wanted to tell a story about my childhood and the community I grew up in, specifically being Japanese American in Southern California, and the types of things that still exist in our lives, such as the incarceration of our ancestors and the displacement of our people and how that affects us today. So No No Girl is this story from a Yonsei perspective, but it deals with a generational trauma. And I was really excited when these three superstars joined on the project because they're amazing.
Great, thank you for that, Paul. Maybe we can go to Mika next.
Hello, my name is Mika Joe. I play Sue Hasagawa. I got involved because Paul's mom posted on the So You Know You're Japanese American When Facebook page. And my dad sent me the post and was like, hey, you should audition for this. And I kind of rolled my eyes initially. But then, like, a week went by and I was like, no, okay, if I want to be an actor, I actually have to audition to things. That's how life works. And so I messaged Bonnie, and then she told me to message Paul. And I messaged him twice because the first email didn't go through or didn't get a response from it. So I DM'd him. And then he sent me all of the audition information. Um, and yeah, thankfully he liked my audition and my callback.
Great, thank you so much. And I'm sure we'll hear more stories from the audition and entry process as we get further into the conversation. But Jill, why don't you introduce yourself next?
Hello, my name is Jill Kaneshiro, and I play Gail Hasagawa. I was very lucky to get the casting notice from East West Players because I'm on their mailing list for everything, and it was something that I saw it, and I'm like, I have to be a part of this. I don't care how or what, but I need to be somehow be a part of this because it's not often or ever that you get to experience a casting notice with multi-generational JA people, and it was something that I saw, and I was like, I'm gonna get this. So yeah, luckily I saw it through East West Players.
Thanks, Jill. And last but not least, Chris.
Hi, my name is Chris Tashima. I'm Sansei in Los Angeles. I'm an actor and a director. And Paul tricked me into being in this movie because he contacted me as a director. And he said, hey, I got some questions about producing and directing. I'm doing this feature. And he introduced himself. And anyone knows when an actor gets a script, they want to know, gee, is there a part for me? So he gave me this script because he wanted me to know about his project he was doing. He told me about himself. And so I start reading it, and there's this role of Uncle Bob. And I'm like, who's going to do that? So I start answering answering Paul's questions, and we're emailing back and forth. And I got a link to his first film, Evergreen, which is amazing. So I'm sitting here going like, how do I get in this movie? And then I told Paul, gee, I love this script. I hope it gets made. So once he knew that I liked his script and I liked his project, he said, well, the role of Uncle Bob is open to you if you want it. So I kid. It kind of went like that, but that's my end of it, Paul.
I mean,
Paul contacted me. He did contact me and asked me questions about production, and he did send me a script, and I just loved it. And I loved his first film. I love Paul's story, two-time cancer survivor, already on his second feature film. So I was anxious to do anything I could to help him. And when he offered me the role of Bob, I was just so excited because this kind of part does not come along very often. I've been acting for 35 years now, making movies, and how often do I get a script that has a Japanese American, a sansei like myself, my own age, about a Japanese American family, dealing with their history during the war. I mean, so much of this was important to me, so I was just thrilled that I got to be a part of it.
Thanks for that, Chris. And since we were talking about kind of the iteration of the script, Paul, can you tell us a little bit about how this story came about? What inspired you particularly to write this story, especially from female perspective as the leading character, and then any other inspiration that you kind of took along the way?
I mean, the story about a family discovering buried or heirlooms that belong to them from the time of incarceration, from the aftermath of Pearl Harbor. I feel like I've heard that story pop up in and out of my life since I've been really little. And the idea of, oh, the blah blah blahs have a chest buried in, some small little town on the coast somewhere, or some little, cul-de-sac neighborhood, just a really innocuous, like, there's people's lives and belongings out there. That was a real folklore tale that was stranger than fiction. And I knew when I had the opportunity, like we had before I started writing No No Girl, I was like, okay, second feature film, I can bring in a big ensemble. We're good enough to do this story now. I knew it was the first story I wanted to do. And I mean, it's not based off of one true story. The whole movie is an amalgamation of everything I grew up with as a kid, in Southern California, being Japanese American, participating in Japanese American community. And, I think the only thing that's really missing would be like Seiyo basketball, which was like a Japanese, pretty much a JA or Asian American basketball league that's pretty famous. Yeah, but it's just a story about me and my sister and how we grew up, and I feel like I told it with as much honesty as possible, and I think in that sense I could convey honesty in the characters that weren't so like me, or like, my family, or like, my close friends.
Yeah, thanks for that. And I think it is something that speaks to a lot of different families. This year's Tadaima being a theme around memory, I think we've all been sort of reflecting on how does community memory and the shared history of the community affect our own understanding of our past, and particularly in our family histories. So much of this time period, and particularly that the necessity to hide certain things, whether physically or metaphorically, about our past and our heritage. But certainly that idea of burying treasure, I mean, that is a thorough line in my own family story as well. My great grandfather buried our family katana in the ground beneath his farm, which is now paved over by the Hawthorne City Airport, and other priceless family artifacts that were never recovered. So there's this kind of moment, I think, towards the climax of the film when the family does recover that chest, that almost feels like a fantasy realized, and this sort of dream that I think a lot of JA families would love to experience, but probably will never materialize themselves. And I think that was a tremendous gift that you're able to manifest on screen for so many of our families that have these kinds of stories. So thank you for that. And I guess, again, thinking through some of our other family stories and how they're kind of connected to this broader narrative, each of you have kind of talked a little bit about, family history and how meaningful it was to actually act as Japanese Americans in a Japanese American film directed and written by a Japanese American. So, thinking about what are the threads in your own family histories or your own family stories that kind of connected to this film, are there any anecdotes that each of the actors would be willing to share?
I can share something. There's a lot of ways that this story was very intertwined with my own life and my family's life. One of them that was, I think, connected to a lot of the cast was the chest. There's just the fact that there was a chest that existed that got stored somewhere. Um, like right before um, right before filming, I think my dad inherited a large chest that was stored at Union Church from his family, which he donated to Janum. I think Kurt and Scott both said that their families had just recovered their chests. Like, it was really weird that I think the three of us and Paul our families had uncovered that chest like at the same time. That was something that I think was really interesting. And then, like, for me, very personally, just specifically the character Sue and how much her life intertwined with mine. I found uh, made it even easier to like gravitate towards the script and make it come alive. With the things that she was struggling with in school, with her age, with even the relationship between her brother and cousin and her was very reminiscent of my family.
Yeah, it feels very relatable. Certainly, as someone who has that same kind of relationship with my sister at moments. But well done, certainly on executing a range of emotion. And I think that's one of the other things that struck me about this film and each of your performances. Going from these really heartfelt, emotional scenes, and then the next moment we're all laughing, as there's these kinds of moments of touching comedy, and then the relatability of the family dynamics of the Japanese American extended family. But yeah, back to the other question. I'm not sure, Chris or Jill, if you had other anecdotes that you'd be willing to share, kind of how your own family stories may have provided some of the fodder for your characters.
I will go. I don't have the same experience that I've been hearing most people have experienced. Like, I don't have the chest. To be honest, I don't actually know if one of my family members was incarcerated or not. Like, I get multiple stories. We went to a lunch, a huge lunch that, I'm sorry, there's a plane going over. I hope you can't hear that. But we went to a huge lunch, and she said it was her reparation that she received. And so, but when I tried to talk to them about it now, before I went into filming this, her family was like, no, that didn't happen. She wasn't she wasn't incarcerated. And so I don't even know the actual story of my own family's experience in it. And I think I'm like just now experiencing the whole what it means to be Japanese American. For my whole life, it was basically you're an American, and I that whole side of me was pushed aside, not by my own. It was just like, you need to fit in, and this is who you are. And I just grew up being like that and experiencing that. And now as an actor, I'm like, oh, just being an actor now is, you see so much more that I never got to experience. So now I'm learning more about my culture and my history. And this film helped me to actually learn so much more. So I know I'm babbling, but it was just like I didn't have the experience that this family brought, but um, I know that it's in there, and I want to learn more about my history now because of that. So that was my experience from the film.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. That's very interesting.
Yeah, I don't really have stories that my family that are sort of paralleling in this film, but I do know, having been involved with a lot of theater and film projects about camp, and having talked about it for this long, that it was common for some sansei to not be able to talk to their parents about it, because they would either get angry when they're asked about it, or just never talked about it, or you know um, didn't have as much information as they wanted. I'm talking about sansei understanding what their family went through. My parents were not like that, but they were younger. They were kids when they went into camp, so they didn't have the same experience as a young adult Nisei, or older Nisei. So knowing that it was that experience for a lot of sansei, that they didn't have the answers, or they had a hard time talking to their parents about it. I made that part of my character, and in the end scene, when the chest is actually uncovered, that I don't think Bob knew that it was there. And I think Uncle Bob had doubts. He had heard about it, maybe. He had never been able to talk to his mother about it. So for me, making that discovery for the family, is what I had Bob go through at that time, and he had Sue to thank for it.
Yeah, and it feels very real. I think that reaction, and I guess the relationships, the kind of family ties that you're able to all weave together throughout this film, really did remind me a lot of not just my family, but many of the other Japanese American families that I've interacted with. And just kind of thinking about some of those dynamics between the generations. I mean, that's one of the areas where I felt this film had a lot of nuance to it, in the sense that we don't have a presence of a Nisei in the film. Like, it's the absence of the Nisei matriarch, and that feeling, that weight of her absence, that really kind of casts a shadow over this entire extended family, but particularly the Sansei children, right? And this idea of some of this tension and this maybe unresolved conflict, because these conversations were never had during life, between the parents and the children, about what camp really meant. But then also this sort of necessity of the Yonsei, who maybe lack a certain degree of the intergenerational trauma, and maybe lacking the filter to then not ask the questions that are the difficult things for the family to talk about, which again feels very true to life. And so it's one of the things that kind of almost surprised me, was how much I could relate to certain aspects of that double layer of kind of the intergenerational trauma, where there's no communication in many cases between the Nisei and Sansei about camp, until at least a certain point in people's lives, where maybe they do feel willing to open up about that towards the end of their lives, if they do at all. And then you've got sort of the Sansei and the Yonsei, where it's like Yonsei are just trying to figure out the world that they're living in today, and we have this sort of privilege to be able to talk about and learn about these topics that the Sansei weren't able to at our age. And I think that is really something that Mika's character deals with, and I think the entire family is sort of reckoning with the fallout of the willingness and the eagerness to kind of talk about that. But yeah, I guess Paul, as the writer, kind of where did you pull that inspiration from? Was this really from? Did you conduct some interviews with other families? Was this just anecdotal, composite character work that you kind of pulled together from past friendships, relationships, etc.?
I mean, that's tough. I think there there weren't any formal interviews with families where I, learned how they interacted, or their histories. it did feel like I said just like anecdotal from my life and the things I knew growing up. I mean, I didn't really feel like I had to study it because it's coming from me. It's about me. It's about, you know, it's about my friends and my parents. It's about my bachan and my jichan. You know, my jichan was in the camps and he fought in the 442nd, and I grew my whole life learning about that. So I felt like the knowledge was inherent, and the story was just I wrote it so quickly because I felt like I knew what I wanted to say, and it was just like pouring out, you know. And I didn't I didn't sit down and go, how many people should be in the family? Like I knew how many people were in the family, and I knew the dynamics that I wanted to achieve between the characters. I felt like when I started writing the family, it was like it was one of those weirder writing experiences because I don't consider. I mean, I I'll get a lot of like attention for saying this, but I don't really consider myself like a writer. I'm kind of writing to achieve the storytelling, and I feel like the writing is good enough to get us to production where I can really, mold it with the actors and everything. But when I was writing those moments, I do remember thinking, wow, these characters are so real to me. And this family, after I started reading the pages I had written, I'm like, wow, this is more than just some characters. Like I know these characters. These characters are real to me. And so when we
That's
came,
yeah. That's the important thing about our having Japanese Americans in the writers' room and behind in the director's chair and telling our stories because they just bring authenticity to it. I could tell from reading this script that if this was all true, this was all, even I said this is not exactly my family story, but I knew these people. And, I think that's the beautiful thing about this script is it's all so relatable to us. I think we know this as soon as we see these people, the food, these homes, these items on screen. It's something we instantly connect to. So I could tell that. That's what I could tell from reading the script. Yeah, Paul, it was okay, but the film, the film is the way it is because the script was the way it was. So
I'm very
it's
proud of the script. I think it's the best script I've written yet. And just holding it when we were done, I felt like I could show this, I could present these sides to actors, and we could, I'm just growing as a filmmaker. Every film I've made, each feature has been bigger, and our crew gets bigger, and we get more talented. And I feel like I'm also improving at the rate that I see my peers improving, and I see our production improving as a whole. So I think it's just really encouraging for what we have as a group and the talent in, that's in our circle right now.
I think also in the community, right? Because 20 years ago, it would have been harder to make a film that shines in every one of these aspects. And of course, there's many great films that did do that. But I think it's becoming a little bit easier when you look at the talent pool within Japanese American community to start to piece together these kinds of stories. And then, of course, the technology, right? And our access to certain kinds of technology that makes filmmaking less expensive and technically easier in some capacities than it used to be when we're shooting on film or video. But I think again, one of the things that really speaks to the success of that script is how real Mika, your character, seems throughout this entire experience, and of course, a lot of that is you bringing that character to life. So I'm just kind of curious, when you approached that script, how much did you have to kind of like work with that dialogue? Was there some kind of give and take versus what was written on the pages? Did you guys workshop any of that to make it feel more real, to be spoken in your voice or in the character's voice that you execute?
Um, most of what I say in the film is how it was written when it was first handed to me. There's some like improvised moments and some ad libs here and there. But a lot of it really was just the way that Paul wrote Sue was very authentic and real. They felt like words that I would say. They were emotions that I've felt. Um, and so, yeah, I didn't have to work too hard as an actor to be like, this does not feel like how a human being speaks. It was natural. It came out. And yeah, that's a testament to how good Paul's writing was. When I first read that, would have never thought that he ever doubted his writing skill.
Well, and then as a follow-up question, what was it like for you to be having your first major starring role in a feature film on this particular project?
It was very, very intimidating. Yeah, I from the very beginning was extremely excited, but also very scared. I felt like there was a lot of pressure that I was putting on myself to like be perfect and do this role justice because uh, I knew how close it was to me and how real it was, which means that other people would also see this story as real, and it would touch them, and there would be things that were recognizable. So if there was something that was really inauthentic about my performance, it would be a little more amplified because it was more personal to a lot of people. Um, I also had really bad imposter syndrome because everyone else has done a lot of work in film and in theater. Um, and yeah, there were like days on set where uh, I spent a lot of time with Kurt and Scott, obviously, and they would just be talking about like the different jobs they've done, the roles they've been up for, and all these things. And I was like, everything that I've ever done is contained within a school. Um, but they were very encouraging when I did say those when those thoughts came out as words of like I don't think I'm like a real actor yet because I don't have this resume. They'd be like, "Shut up. You're the lead in this film and you're doing a great job." So it was very encouraging. Everyone was very encouraging along the way to just kind of squash all of those imposter syndrome feelings.
That's fantastic, and I guess
None of us knew what we were doing either. I'll tell you, Mika, that as soon as you know what you're doing as an actor, you become boring in a performance, because you never know. I mean, you're playing with people throwing you new things, so that's the exciting part of it. I hope that happens. If it's all stuff that you know and predict, then it's like it becomes boring.
those are wise words, Chris. And I'm thinking that maybe some of that mentorship does exude through the screen, right? When you were kind of looking at that supportive environment, what sounds like this production was being then reflected within these performances that are captured on screen. And I think, again, thinking about some of these real life tie-ins or callbacks to some of the characters, Jill, one of the favorite moments about your character for me was this kind of moment when she's questioning whether she's turning into her mother or not. And I think, we've all sort of been there in our own ways, right? Especially, myself, I became a father a couple of years ago during the pandemic, and that kind of journey into parenthood, it starts to raise those kinds of uncomfortable questions. But it also made me think a lot, particularly in the role of women within the Japanese American family. At least in my family, it seems like the JA women were the glue that held the family together. And it's sort of interesting because aside from the grandmother character who is passed on, your character and Mika's character, these are sort of the only JA women that are really very present within the film, and it's kind of interesting again how much weight that carries. And I'm just curious, what did you do anything in particular to prepare for that role? Were you pulling from some of the own relationships that you've had to other women in your family?
Of course, yeah. I mean, it's basically that is a page out of my own history. It's, my grandmother was the glue, as you say. Once she passed, everyone else in the family kind of went their own ways. We all gathered. We all were who we were because of her strength and her wanting to keep the family together. And just now, like, our families kind of are getting together again and trying to have moments with each other. And again, it's because one of the grandkid daughters is trying to bring us all back together again. So it is absolutely the matriarch that I've experienced that holds the family together, that brings us all together. And that part where I do say, like, I'm not turning into my mother, am I? I've always thought that was funny. Like, I always thought, like, I don't want to be like my mother. But the older I get, I'm like, God, I hope I am. Like, I hope that is, like, the main parts of her. I'm like, I hope that's who I am. And so that statement that I made there was very true, but also very, like, I know Sue, Gail wanted, really respected her mother and wanted to be like her mother too. So that part was wonderful for me.
Yeah, and it definitely shines through on screen. So well done with that.
Thanks.
I'd love to bring in a couple of audience questions at this point. We had one from Grace, who's asking to the entire panel, how has the rising virulent anti-Asian hate the past few years affected your filmmaking? And that's kind of a question that I had as well. I don't know what the timeline was like for the production on this film. I assume it took place during the pandemic, but yeah, if you all might be willing to comment on that.
It just made it all the more urgent. I mean, the reason I wanted to start making films in the first place was to change the image that we might have out there, because so many people don't know any Asian Americans. What they have is what they get through media, and what we've been in the media has been false and so limiting. And, just the idea that we are American and we've been part of America for so long has always sort of been at the root of, films that I make and want to make. So it just was reinforcement that, we have to do this.
Yeah, no, I totally agree with Chris. It was urgent. It is urgent, like, to show people who we are, and we're not these caricatures that are presented so often, and where we have our own identities, but it's, we're all intertwined within, as an American, and it's just so beautiful, and we all need to accept our own, like, who we are, and that it's these kind of stories that people can see and say, oh, this is how we are, this is who we are. It's so relevant and urgent, especially now. Like, I'll put it in the perfect time.
I felt really proud about it because, I mean, mirroring off of what Chris and Jill have been saying, I just felt really proud to be committed to this story during a time that was so shocking to us, and to then commit to having a majority JA, AAPI cast, and not just the cast, but the crew too, was full of Japanese Americans and Asian Americans, and not just like here or there. It was over half the crew was Asian American, and heads of departments as well. So I wanted to make sure that there was a big leadership role, and that our voices could be told everywhere it was possible.
Yeah, I mean, it shines through in those little moments too, right? Even the kinds of set dressing, like the kabuki senbei that are on the kitchen counter, and other little details that I think
It's all
certainly,
real.
yeah.
That's from my house, or my cousins, my aunts, uncles' houses, or my friends' houses. All the props too add to the realism because they're all real. The chest that's dug up. I mean, sorry if you haven't seen the film yet, but chest that's dug up that's really from the camps. That's my Ji-John's chest from the camps, and the props and it just adds to the entire story that the things that we're pulling out of the chest and the things that are in this family's life are real because they are real.
There's a lot of power to that. Mika, did you have any thoughts you want to add to that question?
I think similar just to Chris and like the urgency in getting the story out. It's an interesting question for me because I didn't really have like a start of filmmaking before this one. But I think with my art in general, with theater, and just uh, really wanting to share stories that were accurate and amplify voices of people that aren't um, aren't given a voice normally, um, is incredibly important, and even more important um, anytime a tragedy ensues. Yeah, and I think being a part of this film and having the characters be so real and so multi-dimensional, like, and they're funny and they're sad and they're angry and there's so many emotions, which was really encouraging to go into this filmmaking, because I think um, a lot of the harm that is being uh, um, a lot of the harm from media is the stereotyping of people of color, specifically Asian women in this case, of there being like the two types. There's the like martial artist, and then there's like the prostitute. And the fact that Paul didn't have any of that, there's like a little nod to maybe some martial arts with the sword, but it's never there's not a real action in there. But that it's a real person who is more than just those things that society has assigned for like our roles in entertainment. Um, Having a role like that, and hopefully having more roles like that in like big mainstream and blockbuster films, is very important, um, because then it helps get rid of that idea that Asian women are like commodity, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. I mean, you kind of look at the way that Asian American women have been objectified on screen since Anna May Wong, these
Mhm.
kind of Lotus Blossom and Dragon Lady stereotypes and tropes. And unfortunately, you look at mainstream television and Hollywood studio films, and we still see a lot of that being reflected at us. And certainly, there's that feedback loop that some people who are more susceptible to those kinds of messaging and don't have authentic portrayals like the ones that we see in this film as counterbalance in their lives might be more inclined to believe what they see on screen. So we certainly hope to see more of these kinds of representations and these nuanced portrayals of Asian American women. It also kind of makes me think a little bit about the fact that we haven't seen that many Japanese American female-led films, and a couple that come to mind, Picture Bride, also Ria Tajiri's Strawberry Field, which Chris, I know that you played a role in that film. I'm curious, Paul, for you, did any of those films sort of influence the way that you approached the female characters in your script, or was this again just kind of pulling from the relationships and the history that you had? I'm curious also as a director if you had any kind of interest or models in terms of films that you wanted to not replicate but took inspiration from in your directing process.
No, I didn't really go to Japanese American films to try and make this movie. I think, um, I mean, it's a tough question because you're always watching and adapting and learning and absorbing. But there wasn't a moment where I wanted to see how other Japanese American films were portraying Japanese American people, if that's what you're asking. But um, again, like these characters were from my life, and it wasn't so much a study on to portray them as just an expression of who I am. And each character is a bit of who I am, obviously. But my family, I'm half Japanese, half European mix, and my Japanese American identity is all channeled through my mother and my bachan. And my jichan died when I was young, so my bachan was around my entire life, and I felt that matriarchal kind of path to identity of who I was as Japanese American through my mom, through my bachan. And I think through those relationships and the relationships I have, with my sibling Lori and with my friends and my community, I was able to build these characters. Um, I greatly admire all these films that have come before to lead us to this place. And something that's been really amazing coming from this film, from No No Girl, is meeting so many other Japanese American filmmakers that have been coming to these screenings. And, Chris was the first one who's been in so many. But I've been meeting other directors and other filmmakers, and just to come together and talk about how we're making these films together. Oh, you also shot at my Manzanar. That's so impressive. And just the camaraderie and the fellowship of meeting these other JA filmmakers has been something I didn't expect to touch me so much. I think it's been one of the most beautiful things about it, along with hearing the stories from everybody, from people who were in camp or people who had survived camp or had parents that survived camp like me. So I think, again, bringing it back to the community, finding that sense within a larger community that something I'm doing and we're doing in this film is touching a lot of people the same way that I feel like I'm representing myself in this film.
Absolutely. Well, we have another audience question. This one comes from David Fujioka, and it's directed towards Chris. Chris, being a seasoned actor and director, were you tempted to offer suggestions to Paul, or did you let him do his own thing on set?
I was too busy studying my lines. When I'm acting, it's a lot of work for me, and I'm half serious about that. I spend so much time on my own character, but no, because it's important to me that a filmmaker do the work on his own and it be his work, and I just take a back seat and watch and let him sink or swim. So there was never any point where I felt like I would need to step in, like something's going wrong here, or it was educational for me just to watch Paul. He's it's amazing watching him at work because it's so simple. And I think that's a sign of a great filmmaker, is that they make it look simple, they make it look easy. So no, never ever was I tempted to feel I needed to say anything.
Great. Yeah, thanks for clarifying that. And we have another question from Ray, which is, Paul, can you please share your thoughts on naming the film No No Girl?
Yeah, of course. So being a no-no, and specifically no-no boys, is something in Japanese American community that we have all grown up hearing about. And this is one of those situations again where I feel like I'm talking about our history in a place that I would go for history. Like I would go to Jam where I talked about this. I would go to Tadaima in Japanese American, uh, the pilgrimages, but to talk about it in this aspect, no one knows about no boys. No one knows about the loyalty questionnaires that had to be answered by um, people that were incarcerated and evicted and sent to the concentration camps. But when the loyalty questionnaires were given out, they were faced with a really unfair and horrible problem where they had to answer these two ridiculous questions that told them to forsake their loyalty to the Japanese Empire and asking if they will fight for the United States. So, are you loyal and will you fight? And if you answered no and no, you became labeled a no-no boy or a no-no, and you were sent to Tule Lake, a really terrible concentration camp, save for criminals, you know. So Nono Boy has a big history in the Japanese American community, and to adopt that name for this film was something I didn't take lightly. But it speaks to, since it speaks to many different things in this film. But I think the thing that it speaks to most is that what happened to our ancestors in the camps and in the wake of Pearl Harbor still affects us today. As a Yonsei, fourth generation Japanese American, with two generations between me and the camps, I still have to deal. Our family is still dealing with the consequences from those years, and we're so distant from it, yet we still live with it every day. And the characters in our film are living with it to this day. To
Yeah.
Adopt No No Girl is kind of how I wanted to portray the Yonsei experience, or at least the generational gap between the trauma that we felt each generation away from the camps. And now that we're here in present day, 80 years later, still dealing with it. I mean, that's kind of where I get the inspiration from this name, to feel the courage to adopt that name for this film.
Yeah, and I think there's a lot of nuance too in not just the choice to make that the title of the film, but then the ways that you sort of explore some of those complicated questions, like why does Bachan have an imperial Japanese flag in her chest?
Mhm.
And then kind of reckoning with this idea that, well, but then we also had 442 in this family, and I think it speaks to that varied experience even within a single family unit of how people sort of conceptualize that identity during the wartime. But then also, building off of what you're just saying about this kind of idea of grappling with this, particularly again as a fellow Yonsei and like being farther removed from the wartime experience as we are, also acknowledging that there are few Nisei and elder Sansei who remain that lived through that, and in another 10 or 15 years, then there won't be any. And so, in a lot of ways, it is kind of up to the Yonsei, Gosei, and younger Sansei in this moment to continue pushing that forward. So I guess somewhat related, we have another audience question from James Okamura, who asks, what Nikkei film directions, themes, or elements particularly interest Yonsei, Gosei, or younger generations? I would just amend that to say, like, what are some of your thoughts, all of the panelists here, about how we can kind of continue to tell stories like this in ways that interest these younger and emerging generations?
Mm.
I don't know, but it's exciting. What I mean by that is the fact that Paul Yonsei is making this film, to me, means a lot, because 15, 20 years ago, the Yonsei were little kids, and we were making our films, and we didn't know how much further we could carry the importance of the education about the camps and what it did to our families and how it impacted us, and the fact that we have now this whole new generation telling that story, their perspective, that's entirely new. This is entirely different from the films that I made or people made, my contemporaries. So that's really exciting to me, because there's so much more to learn. It's different for each generation. It's different for each family. There are so many more stories to tell. So I'm grateful that Paul cares, and that he wanted to make this film, because it's important to me as it is important to him.
Here's the thing, like, when I was in school, when they talked about the incarceration, I'm pretty sure it was a paragraph, and that was it, and there was nothing else touched upon. I currently am doing reading time with kids and like kids in high school, and one of the stories is about the camps, and I asked them, are they learning about this? What is being taught about this particular time in history? And they're like, we have, I think, part of a chapter, it's grown a little bit, but it's still hidden in history. And I think for any generation, mine and younger, it's learning about this is something that we need to know, and for directors like Paul and Chris to keep enlightening us about something that people want to erase, I think is very exciting for any, for our generations and younger. So just the knowledge of it, because we don't even have that really out there.
Absolutely. Nika, do you want to share some thoughts?
Yeah, sure. I think for me specifically, some other JA films that I'd just be interested in seeing, more things of just people making stories that they know. I loved the script for No No Girl the second that I got my hands on the whole thing, because like I've said already, things were recognizable, things in the story were very accurate to my own life, and I felt seen and heard and represented in a way that in a much deeper way than I've ever felt before. And I think just continuing to tell those stories, because it seems like for me, I was like, this seems so boring because it's just my everyday life, like struggling with finding friends and roommates. Who wants to hear that? But it's my real story. It's something that's relatable to me and to many other people. And so I just think like continuing to have people like Paul and other writers and storytellers bringing their life to the table and sharing their story is an exciting thing to think about. And even if it seems like it's just your everyday life and that it might seem so mundane, there are aspects of it that are going to hit people in ways that you might not realize in the moment.
Yeah, I think that's really well stated, and again, maybe something to think about among our JA creatives of how we can kind of continue to tell these stories in ways that do also incorporate the mundane aspects of our daily lives. And how do we tie in some of these stories to just general American narratives and contemporary discourse in society? And again, it's something that I think a lot about as we kind of lose our last camp survivors. How do we all take this forward and continue to make sure that these stories are told and known for generations to come? But Paul, I'm wondering what your thoughts are, especially as a writer director and someone who I hope will continue telling stories like this about the Japanese American community. What are your thoughts in terms of next steps or directions that we might be able to, as a community, move in with film and other forms of media?
I can only work for what I can accomplish, and every film I'll make from here on out will inherently touch on this subject matter, because that's what I know. That's what I can confidently speak to. I think there are so many stories yet to be told from our communities, because what happened to us in World War II was it was incredible. It was just unheard of and beyond. It was I said it before, but it's stranger than fiction. Strange events, unprecedented events to one small community, and we had to grow up and deal with that. Led to so many more weird and different avenues for storytelling, like the folklore that is true but can't be true because it's so ridiculous. I mean, what happened to us was so traumatic that it has left an impact for generations, and the things that we've had to do to overcome that trauma has been equally as grand and as important. So the stories that we can tell, the stories that only exist in our community, are vast and are there to tell. I plucked one out of the air, but the air's full of them. I have I have a lot of ideas for future scripts. I have stories from the camps. I have stories post camps, but these are all things that I don't have to try hard to imagine. You know, all these filmmakers that have the creativity to create universes and worlds, you know, that's good for them. But for me, it's sitting right here in front of me in my own blood. You know, it's there in all of us. I think there's a lot of interesting things coming up. You know, there's a great story that I think a lot of Japanese Americans know about baseball in the camps. I would love to um, adapt that story. I think the future of Japanese Americans in filmmaking isn't just what I'm talking about here, but it's going to be a bigger movement coming up right now.
Yeah, really well articulated there, Paul. And I think it certainly speaks to the variety of stories that we have available within our community. As we're kind of coming down to the end of our time together, I'm wondering if each of our actors could talk about maybe projects that you're working on next, or projects that you would like to work on next along these kinds of lines that Paul is talking about. And then maybe we can close out by talking a little bit about how the audience can continue to support the film in its journey. Chris or Jill, Mika, anyone?
Oh, there's so many stories to be made, you know. The baseball in camp that Paul mentioned, you know, that's been something that I'd wanted to see for so long. I have this idea of an MIS story. It's kind of a mix of James Bond and Raiders of the Lost Ark, and more of a kind of a lighthearted look at how they saved so many people during the war. I mean, there's a lot I would love to see. And then beyond that, you know, I have a few other projects that I'm looking at. You know, I have no worry about. I could do World War II movies for the rest of my life and it wouldn't be finished. You know, it's not like a matter of being pigeonholed in there. There's so much to do there. You know, it's like, you know, I don't think a white filmmaker worries about being pigeonholed doing white male heterosexual leads, you know, stories. Well, why shouldn't we want to do our own stories? You know, I would much rather do our own stories than a Marvel film. And you know, I mean, it's so much more important. It's so rich. It's completely untapped. So yeah, just show me the money.
I have to concur with Chris. I would love to do anything again like this with Japanese American characters. You see that every once in a while, but to have a whole cast of it just meant everything to me. So anything like that out there, please send it my way, universe. And currently, I am working on just a dubbing project for a Disney thing. But I can't say it, but yeah.
Great. Mika?
I'm still in school trying to finish up my last year of college. So all of my current projects are kind of circulating in that bubble. I'm doing some costume design and directing this semester. At my school, I'm trying to push for more just stories in general for people of color to help us feel more represented, or picking plays that are not like racially specific, so that it's open so anyone can feel represented in them. I think that's important at my school. Beyond that, I've been auditioning for things here and there. There's a couple shows that are really trying to push for accurate representation in their leads. I've auditioned for 2 that specifically asked for an Asian American female. One of them was specifically Japanese American, and it was really exciting to ask behind the scenes, like if they wanted to include the incarceration story into it, because it takes place in like the 1950s. So I was like, then that character would have been in the camps, and they said yes. So that was really an encouraging thing, even if I didn't get the role. A really encouraging thing to see just happening slowly in like mainstream media. But if anyone wants to cast me in something, just let me know. Always down to act and to have a job.
Well, certainly sounds like a lot of great work that's going on, and we look forward to seeing what happens next for all of you. Paul, can you tell us a little bit then about how this audience and others can support the film on its journey?
Of course. So we just released No No Girl, so it's very early in its kind of like lifespan. If you've been able to catch the movie already in person or virtually over the past couple days, thank you so much for supporting us. Everything that we're doing, we're such a small production in the scope of what it takes to make films. Every step of the way needs a new injection of life and energy and money and people. So all of our in-person screenings are tied into fundraisers for the events or for the venues that we're at and for our film to continue to have life going forward. All of our information for future screenings can be found on our Instagram, which is at nonogirl_movie, or at our website, which is 8eastproductions.com. And that's my production company, 8 East, just spelled out. But if you Google No No Girl, you'll find out what we're up to. On the 23rd, we have a screening in person in Orange County. Tickets are very slim if they're left. It's a big venue, but we're selling out pretty quickly. After that, we'll be at the Silicon Valley Asian Pacific Film Festival, which is an online film festival for our film, so you can catch it there. Otherwise, we'll have screenings coming up over the next couple months, and just continue to support us and look for more films coming out. I know everyone said, "Oh, send them my way." I'm like, oh, if I could make another film right now and cast all of you, I would. So, this goes unspoken between us, but they know we have a long, long path ahead of us as team leads.
Well, thank you, Paul, and thank you to the rest of our panelists for a wonderful discussion. Thank you also to the audience members this evening who joined us live. We hope that you'll see some more of the Tadaima programming over the next few days. Thanks again for joining us this evening.